so much. It's always wonderful to be out and get to the various parishes around the diocese. Now, although I know Annalisa said that we could be here all night, I'm going to hit the sweet spot between one, keeping you all interested, but two, not burning out the babysitters. Because while I love stages being rushed, having sort of hordes of kids is why I came out tonight, because I could do that at home. I could just sort of tackle it uninterrupted by my own kids. So the theme for, as I understand it, the theme for these events is family, is marriage. It's the idea of how do we go ahead and strengthen the core relationships in our lives, starting first and foremost with our vocation to marriage, and through that, our role as parents. And tonight we're going to talk about that, but we're going to start first by talking about what I think is one of the primary disruptors to those relationships being successful. It's one of the major distractions that keeps us from attending to the people in our lives the way that we're called to. And they're these. We're going to talk about technology. Because I don't think in 2024 we can talk about strengthening families without first talking about the pitfalls of things that may seem like they're bringing us closer together, but in reality can distract, disrupt, and distance us from one another. So as Annalisa said, my wife and I have 4 kids, and our son is 14, our girls are 11, and 8 and 5. Hopefully they'll be asleep when they get home. I live in Fredericksburg, so it'll take me about 8 hours to get home. But many years ago when my son was 2, he and I were playing, and he had all of his stuffed animals out and a bunch of wooden fruit. So he picks up this wooden banana from his bowl of wooden fruit, and he puts it up to his head, and he says, "Hello, Daddy." I put my thumb and pinky up to my head, and I say, "Hi, son. You having a good time?" He said, "Yes, I am." And then he points the banana at me and says, "Say cheese." Click. What are you doing? "I took your picture." "Hold on." He starts swiping his finger across the curve of the banana. He says, "I will send it to you." Here's where things get less funny. This was the phone we had at the time. We didn't have a smartphone in our house. In fact, as far as my wife and I could tell, at that time, 12 years ago, my son had seen a smartphone once when a friend of ours had come over to the house for the afternoon, and she had it out for maybe 5 minutes. But from that encounter, and just walking around the neighborhood, he understood that a phone isn't just a phone. It's a camera. It's a device that can send pictures back and forth to people. It does a lot more than make calls. And this was a 2-year-old with limited exposure. Why do I bring this story up? It shows how incredibly sensitive children are to technology. If you ask kids to describe technology, it's like asking fish to talk about their experience of water. It's just around. If you really want to weird kids out, describe VHS cassettes to them. I now know how my dad felt when he used to try to describe 8 tracks to me. At one point, I had to tell my kids that phones not only used to be plugged into the wall, but they used to be plugged into themselves. They weren't even cordless. And they were like, "That's weird." Yes, I suppose it was. Neil Postman, in his book, Technopoly, says, and I quote, "One significant change generates total change. If you remove caterpillars from a given environment, you are not left with the same habitat minus caterpillars. You have a new environment, and you have reconstituted the conditions for survival. The same is true if you add caterpillars to an environment that has had none. A new technology does not add or subtract something. It changes everything. So the power of technology to impact not just how we engage with the world, but how we engage with each other cannot be minimized. So let's talk for a little bit about social media. What is social media? Well, were I to create a Webster's definition, it might look something like this. It's an interaction among people in which we create, share, and exchange information and ideas in virtual communities and networks. Sounds pretty good. It allows for the creation and exchange of user-generated content. Now, this doesn't actually talk about the impact of how the exchange of that information affects us. But it is also incredibly popular. In 2023, 73% of Americans use some form of social media on a regular basis. That's a 10% increase from 2008. Quick show of hands, how many of you have a social media account? Your Facebooks, your Twitters, X, whatever we're calling it. Okay, put your hands down, please. Put your hands back up if you have been on them today. All right, keep your hands up. Keep your hands up if you have been on them in the last 5 hours. Keep your hands up if you've been on them in the last hour. We have a winner. So, this is the way that we interact with the world in many ways now. This isn't something that is just for kids or teenagers. This is all of us. This is something that we are doing. There has actually been a 34% increase in time spent on social media globally from 2015 to 2022. Specifically, if we want to look at teenagers and young people, 18-year-olds and 29-year-olds, 88% of them use social media regularly. And when we're talking about regularly, we're talking about on an almost daily basis, and a significant amount of time. In 2022, the average American spent 2.45 hours a day on social media. Now, that's not screens. That's not watching Netflix. That's not being on ESPN. That's just on social media, 2.45 hours. Now, I know what you're all thinking. Yes, but that's post-pandemic. So surely there's been a major increase. Not really. In 2019, we were spending 2.41 hours a day on social media. So this isn't just pandemic-driven. This is something that has been an increasing presence in our lives for quite a while. In North America specifically, we spend about 2 hours and 6 minutes a day just with social media. So here's a little math experiment. If a 10-year-old started using social media today, and that average maintained that 2 hours, 6 minutes a day, that kid would be projected to spend 3.4 million minutes of their life on social media lifetime. That is 6 years and 8 months. 6 years, 8 months of their life projected to be spent on social media. Compare that to 1 year, 11 months socializing with a person outside of their immediate family. So we're talking about almost a 4-to-1 ratio in terms of the time we are spending on social media connecting with people versus times that we are doing it in 3 dimensions with people. I'm going to skip sort of the general stat crunch of all the different sites and different platforms. I'm going to throw a few out there, though, just so you guys can be familiar. All right, show hands. Who's heard of Facebook? All right, great. What about YouTube? Instagram? WhatsApp? Twitter, or the artist formerly known as Twitter, now X? Snapchat? TikTok? Get it while you can. The government's going to shut it down. If you haven't heard of all of these things, I guarantee your kids or your grandkids have. And they probably have accounts. Do we have anybody in the house who works for the NSA? You probably couldn't raise your hand, you'd have to kill me. If you do, then you probably are better at monitoring your kids than I am. If you don't, you're not. And the fact that my 5-year-old, after I updated my operating system on my phone, showed me how to change my ringtone last week.
Wow.
We're still a fairly low-key family in terms of technology, or we tried to. Now, why does this matter, though? Why am I highlighting the fact that we are spending all of this time interacting with other people on social media? To understand that, I want to sidestep and talk a little bit about how we communicate. I've always been fascinated in communication. It's actually the reason why I got into TV in the first place. I always wanted to know how people would interact with each other, how they would understand each other, and how they would convey back that understanding, provide feedback, if you will. We communicate on 4 different levels. The first level is the verbal level. It's the text. It's the transcript of what I would be saying tonight. But that's not the only way in which we communicate. The next level is tone of voice. It's not just what we say, it's how we say it. So, if I say to my 14-year-old, hey, could you clean up your room? And he says, sure, Dad, I'd love to. That's going to mean something very different than, sure, Dad, I'd love to. Clearly, in the second one, I've got a fight on my hands. The way we say things matters. I experienced this first and foremost with my 8th grade math teacher, who, to protect his general reputation, I'm going to call Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith was one of the surliest people I have ever met in my entire life. I mean, really just a man who, God bless him, he was a little ray of sleet. And I was complaining about this to my mother one day, and I said, gosh, Mom, Mr. Smith is just mean. Now my mom, who's a much more charitable person than I am, said, oh, come on, Michael. Why don't you just say what Mr. Smith said, but say it in a really nice way? It'll probably sound better. Okay, sure, Mom. You are the dumbest 8th graders I've ever had the misfortune of teaching. If any of you aspire to anything more complicated than shaking fries professionally, I would be shocked. You must be an ongoing source of disappointment to your parents. So my mom had to admit maybe Mr. Smith had an attitude problem. The third way in which we communicate are facial expressions. What's going on here? Am I looking at you? Am I looking down? Am I smiling? Am I frowning? Do I look worried? Because what our face says communicates a lot about how we are feeling. And the fourth is body language. Am I slumped? Am I guarded? What am I doing? What am I conveying with my posture? When I was in grad school to pay rent, I worked at a company that did SAT prep work for high schoolers. And it was run by a really wonderful Korean family, and the majority of the students that they were working with were Korean. I didn't really have a lot of experience with Korean cultures. And one day my boss came up and said, hey, you gotta lay off on the kids, you're giving them too much homework. What? What do you mean I'm giving them too much homework? Well, you're asking them if they want homework, and they're saying no, and you're giving them homework all the same. I said, I am not. I'm asking them if they want homework, and they're saying yes. My boss said, oh, hold on, no. They're not. They're saying yes. Because in a Korean culture, it's disrespectful to say no to someone in a position of authority. So if you look down while saying yes, they really mean no. I did not know that. And I had won Worst Teacher of the Month award for 3 straight months. So I obviously felt terrible, but things like that matter. So when we think again about those 4 levels of communication, we've got our verbal level, our tone of voice, our facial expressions, and our body language. Here's where God has a sense of humor. As the speaker, I put the most intent, the most effort into the verbal level, into what I am saying. You all, as the receivers, interpret in reverse order. The way that we interpret what someone says, we start first by analyzing their physical posture, then we look at their face, then we listen to their tone of voice, and then and only then do we attend to that textual level. Do we see then why technology that strips away 3 of the 4 levels starts to have a significant impact on the quality of our relationships? How many of you have had a disagreement with somebody over an email or text message? And then it's just like, gosh, okay, why are we not, oh, I get it, okay, you misread this, or okay, let me just call you, let me talk to you. Let's cut through the chafe and actually have a conversation. We need to be able to connect on those levels to truly understand each other and to feel understood. And the technology can prevent us from doing that. Now, please let me be clear. I am not totally anti-technology. I'm not suggesting we take hatchets and smash our devices and all go back to the 1700s. There are a lot of good things about technology. It is a great way to stay in touch quickly. It's a great way to stay in touch when you can't be physically proximate. I was telling Father Bob a little bit about one of my brothers during dinner. I'm the oldest of 3. And the brother who is right below me, he and I are very, very close. We have not lived in the same time zone for 25 years. And in fact, for a good part of the last decade, he's either been in Tokyo or Singapore. He's a phenomenal godfather to our son and a phenomenal uncle to our kids. But he's not able to get from Tokyo to where we are with any regularity. I've been so impressed by the way in which he's continued to foster a relationship with our kids through FaceTime. So we'll set up on a Saturday and he'll actually watch my kids do what they're doing or listen to them play piano, and we'll have those relationships. In the same way, we've gotten to know his son, who's now 3, when he was born during the pandemic, and they could not travel. I did not get to see my nephew until he was 3 years old. And I thought to myself, is this kid going to know who I am? Well, that worry lasted about a fourth of a second, because when I saw him at the hotel, the door's open, he goes, "Uncle Michael," and he runs towards me, because he saw me, and he had seen me on FaceTime. This is great. However, FaceTime is a bridge. The technology is a bridge. We have to remember that the technology ought to be the steward of our relationships, not the source. Technology is the thing that keeps us connected when we can't physically be together until the times in which we can. So one of the big things my brother and I would do, put my hand up, I'm a huge nerd. We would sync board games. He would have his game, I would have my game. We would play board games over FaceTime. My wife is very patient. And we would just play board games over FaceTime. But that's exactly what we'd be doing in real life, and when we would visit each other, we would play the same games. We're trying to keep those in-person relationships strong until they can resume as in-person relationships. But there are clearly some negative impacts to relationships because of technology. One of the biggest things that we've seen is the increase of mental health issues among teenagers and young adults. And one of the major things that we hear repeatedly is a sense of isolation among those generations. A 2019 study reported that 30% of millennials said that they always or often felt lonely. That was before the pandemic. 5 months into the pandemic, another survey reported that 40% of millennials said they always or often felt lonely. 2 out of 5. Compare that to 20% of Generation X and 15% of boomers. Clearly there's an impact on how connected we feel and the meaningfulness that we take in our relationships. In large part, I think it's because of the way that even the devices themselves have impacted our view on the world. There is a great term called doom scrolling. You guys familiar with this? Doom scrolling, for those of you who don't know, is basically when you just get a stream of more and more kind of depressing and horrific and awful news stories on your phone. And it's called doom scrolling because that's how we interact now. Websites are designed to just scroll down. So you basically are just going through mindlessly for hours looking at negative content. And it can create measurable feelings of depression and anxiety. When we are trying to engage in relationships on social media, what often occurs is a lack of genuine interaction. There's a blending of friends and strangers. We're isolated. We're not necessarily connected to everyone. Okay, quick experiment. All of you who have a social media account, go ahead and put your hands up again. Keep your hands up if you have shaken hands with, hugged, or high-fived every single person on your friends list. Right. So what does friends mean now? We're calling people friends that we've never actually been with in person. We're all adults. We understand the nuance and the difference, but someone who's 14 or 15 doesn't. And there can be an incredible social anxiety over the idea of losing friends. I'm going to speak more to that in a minute. Our identity becomes flexible as well when we're online. Who are we speaking to? Whoever they say they are. If I was online saying that I was a taller, younger, more handsome version of George Clooney, I mean, somebody would believe that. It would take a lot of photoshopping. But when we start to tinker with the idea of identity, we are distancing ourselves and disconnecting ourselves from who God authentically made us. This again becomes incredibly confusing for teenagers. The idea of a flexible identity, and you create who you are online, starts to then bubble over into real life. We're driven more by the idea of who we feel we are than the reality of our own created nature. And if teenagers who are feeling uncertain about themselves are going online to try to answer those questions, the answers that they get may not be for their good. They may not align with an authentic Catholic anthropology. Sherry Turkle, who's a sociologist at MIT, said, "We expect more from technology and less from each other. We design technologies that will give us the illusion of companionship without the demands of friendship." I love that. The illusion of companionship without the demands of friendship. Because friendship, true friendship, is hard. You have to work through it. You have to be willing to atone and repair when there are ruptures. The same is not always true when you are dealing with purely online relationships. In fact, Evan Selinger, who is a professor at the Rochester Institute of Technology, says, the very second we become boring, the moment that we make communication anything more than a self-satisfying convenience, we'd be abandoned by fair-weather friends. No explanation necessary, no apologies given, no attempt to blunt the hurt feelings, just an easy check of the unfriend box. But that loss of a friendship online hits kids just as hard as in the real world losing a friend. Because if we say that this is a friend in person and this is a friend online, and there's no distinction between the two, anybody who isn't willing to go through that hard work of atoning and repairing, there's no commitment. There's nothing but interpersonal insecurity, and this causes incredible anxiety for many of the kids that I've worked with over the years. There's a term now called Facebook envy. Other social media platforms are available. Anxiety or jealousy that other people's lives are better than us based on what we see on their social media profiles. It's in essence the digital version of the grass being greener on the other side. Spoiler. Social media is just PR. All it is PR. You're not going to post a picture of yourself in mid-sneeze on social media. You're not going to post about how, it's Saturday night, I'm cleaning the bathrooms again. Like, we don't do that, right? Crushed by taxes. No, so we talk about skydiving. We talk about the times we met such and such celebrity. But there are kids who look at this and go, my life isn't like that. I'm missing out. My life is dull and boring in comparison. Let's stop for a minute. Let's remind ourselves why we're here. Our families, our marriages, those key relationships. One of the terms I've become increasingly sick of in the last 10 years is the good Catholic family, because I don't know what that means. The number of times I've had a couple in my office who've said, we fight all the time. Our kids barely talk to us at home. There's no peace whatsoever. But everybody in the parish thinks of us as a good Catholic family because we're right there sitting at the front of the church every Sunday. And we don't know what to do. We need to move away from the notion of the good Catholic family and move towards the idea of the engaged Catholic family. Because families have to be more than a collective of people who have a shared mailing address or reside under the same roof. An engaged Catholic family genuinely care and are engaged in a positive way in the lives of all of the members. We're involved. We're invested. We're emotionally connected. And I believe that when we are talking about these elements, the things that make up a healthy family, which, by the way, is true regardless of the age of our kids. This is true if we have young kids, this is true if we have adult kids, this is true if it's just a husband and a wife together. All of us are looking for more connection. And I believe that there are 4 distinct elements that make up a healthy, connected family. Unconditional love, consistency with clear expectations, an ability to take responsibility, and that they enjoy spending time together. Let me unpack those. Unconditional love. Unconditional love is loving the person because they are who they are, as opposed to a conditional love that says, I love you if, or I love you when. Can you achieve this amount? Can you score this amount? Can you run this time? Or whatever it happens to be. Back when I was teaching at the SAT prep company, the way that it worked is that you would get the same 3 kids in your shift. So you'd have sort of a standard mini class. So it's a Saturday. It's my 11 o'clock 2-hour block. And 2 of my kids aren't there. So I've got one of my kids there. And we had gone through, I don't know, we were working on chemistry, I think. We finished early. And I said, hey, we got about 30 minutes left. Do you want to go ahead and do another round on the math SATs? And she started to cry. Now, I wasn't a psychologist yet, but my highly attuned clinical skills told me she was sad. And I said, hey, help me out, what's going on? And she said something that I will never forget. She said, I'm a sophomore in high school. I've already taken the SATs. I got a 1590 on the SATs. How perfect do I need to be before my parents will love me? It's been 20 years since I heard that, and I still think of this girl, and I really pray that her parents understand what an incredible young woman they have for a daughter. Because that's what conditional love says. It says you're almost worthy of love, but not quite, work harder. We have to get away from that. We have to lean in and love courageously. Now let me be clear. We can love our children and people in our lives even when we don't like what they are doing. So this morning when I came down, and one of my kids had somebody else in a headlock, and there were bite marks on another, and the cat was in the fridge, I could say, stop! I love you guys, but this is not okay. You have to change what you're doing. There's a huge distinction between who we are and what we do. We can love the person without agreeing with their choices, affirming their choices, supporting their choices, but we can love them. Consistency, clear expectations. Expectations really matter in all relationships. It's particularly true in kids, but it's true for all of us. Think of how frustrating it is when somebody changes the rules as we go. I did this, well, I didn't want it that way. Fine, I'll do it this way then. Wait, what are you doing? I want it the other way. Just tell me what you want. Please tell me what you want. We must have a clear sense of what people expect from us in relationships. It helps kids and all of us feel safe and secure. So when we are connecting with someone else, we have to stick to what we say and be consistent with our limits. So we must be very, very careful before issuing enormous ultimatums. If I tell my 5-year-old, if you jump off the couch one more time, you are grounded for the next 17 years. I need to be ready to enforce that, and I have to make sure that it is actually commensurate with what she's doing. Because otherwise, she's going to have no sense of confidence in my relationship with her. And she'll probably think I'm a lunatic. But she certainly won't take me seriously. Because if the punishment for jumping off the sofa is the same as the punishment for punching your brother in the face, it's the same as the punishment for robbing a 7-Eleven, then there's no consistency in terms of what we are really asking. You can break out all parenting styles, and actually this applies to all relationships, but specifically parenting styles, in 4 quadrants of a grid. Imagine 2 axes: love, expectation. You have high love, high expectation, low expectation. 3 of these 4 quadrants are not good. In a situation where we have high love but no expectation, this is a permissive approach. This is the approach that says, you're so cute, you can just do whatever you want. You want to eat cake for breakfast? Okay. You don't like brushing your teeth? That's fine, don't worry about it. I'm sure the dentist will have no problem. The flip side of that is when we have high expectation but low love. This is an authoritarian approach that says, don't screw up. You want me off your back, do your job. Until then, I'm going to be on you until you figure this out. If we have a low love and low expectation, this is a neglecting or a rejecting parental approach. You can do what you want, so I don't care. You're not worth my time. I don't give a damn about you. So we have to have a high love and high expectation approach. This is not authoritarian or authoritative. This is the approach that says, I do ask a lot of you because I believe you can do it. And I'm going to be right there with you every step of the way, cheering you on. And when it doesn't go well, I'm going to be the first one to you to pick you up and dust you off and say, it's okay. We're going to get them next time. I'm proud of you. That's what we need. We have to have that clear sense of undeniable love for the person while encouraging them to grow and flourish and achieve all the things that God offers them in their lives. Living out their vocations to the fullest. The third point is that we have to be willing to take responsibility, that ability to take responsibility. We make mistakes. We are human. Parents are not exempt from this. It is mind-boggling to me the number of times I've heard parents say, well, I can't apologize to my kids. I'll lose parental authority. No, not at all. Our kids know that we've messed up sooner than we have. Let's say in the general chaos of a dinner, I'm putting out dessert for everybody and I forget one of my kids. Daddy, you forgot? No, I didn't. Go on upstairs. Ah. They go upstairs later, I realize, oh my gosh, I didn't give you dessert. So I go upstairs to talk to my kid. I'm really sorry I didn't give you dessert. You didn't? Gosh, I didn't even notice. No, of course you noticed. Our kids understand that we are human. And in owning the times that we've made a mistake, in apologizing appropriately, it does two key things. The first is that it sends a clear message to our kids: I love you so much that I'm willing to put in the time and the effort to fix this, to repair us. It's an incredible show of dignity for the child. The other key component is that it gives the kids a model of what repair looks like in a relationship. I have a working theory that one of the reasons we see so many challenges for marriages in this country is that we have two whole generations of people who lived under the myth of don't fight in front of the kids. It's true, you don't want to fight in front of the kids, but it's okay to disagree in front of the kids, because having a disagreement and then showing how to fix it gives the kids a roadmap back when they inevitably have interpersonal friction in their own lives. Because what do we have instead? Two generations of people who don't know how to resolve interpersonal conflict. So if we can provide that for our kids, what a gift. To show them how much we love them, that we are willing to say, I was wrong. Please forgive me. And to give them the example of how to do the same when it happens in their own lives, which it inevitably will. That fourth point, families who enjoy spending time with each other. This is really easy when there are shared interests. Quick show of hands, who among you share the exact same interests with every single person in your house? Mm-hmm. So if there are areas in which we can go ahead and connect, that's great. A couple of years ago, my kids got really into the fact that I had a fantasy football team. And I won the league that year. Please hold your applause. But they made me a trophy. And they had a parade for me, which was adorable. So it was basically a toilet paper roll that they had covered with glitter that they walked around in front of the house saying, Daddy's a champion, Daddy's a champion. CPS was not called, for which I am grateful, because we live in a college neighborhood. They're used to all sorts of weird stuff. But that was great. That's not the point, though. We can't expect our kids to go and take an interest in what we are interested in. We, as the adults, have to be willing to reach out to the other person. We as spouses have to be willing to take interest in what interests our spouses. We can't sit on our own island of hobbies waiting for somebody to come hop over. I had a wonderful example of this in my own life. My dad is not a baseball person. I love baseball. I'm a Houston Astros fan. You talk to me outside about garbage cans. We're past that, I hope. Last time I made that joke, the audience actually booed, which I did not deserve. The team might have, but that's okay. Love baseball, love the Astros. My father played football at LSU, so in his mind, baseball and all non-contact sports make no sense, because it's that game that people are carrying clubs and not using for any particular reason. But anyway, so we grew up in Houston for part of the time, and I was working in Houston after college, right downtown by where the Astros had this fantastic new stadium. So I called my dad one day and I said, hey Dad, do you want to go to the Astros game with me? Nah, I don't know. That's baseball. Said, well, Dad, I don't know if you knew, this baseball stadium has a retractable roof. My father's an engineer. Retractable roof. That sounds incredible. So, we're sitting there, first base side, seventh inning, the roof rolls back. Wow, my dad's transfixed. He's looking at this huge structure of glass and steel rolling back. Amazing. Next week, Dad, I'm going to think about going to the Astros. Will I come? Absolutely. So, he comes, he's telling me, did you know that the roof weighs 17 gajillion tons. Imagine the way they tested it to make sure it was hurricane-proof. They fired 2x4s in the glass at 240 miles an hour to make sure it would jump. No, Dad, I didn't know that. It's amazing. So, had a great time. Third week, I asked my dad, Dad, want to go to the Astros? Absolutely. So we go. It rains. The roof stays closed. On the way home, I said, Dad, I'm so sorry about the roof. He said, you know I don't care about the roof, right? I'm just happy to be here with you. Oh. Which was really beautiful, and as a 23-year-old, to hear that from your dad, how affirming. I try to do this with my own kids. My kids love the beach. My wife does too. There's an island down at the Outer Banks called Ocracoke. We've gone there every year for the past 11 years. And now we've gotten to the point that we can rent a house, but for the first 8 years, we can't. You can set up your tent on the sand dunes. They've got a national park there. You roll out of your tent, up a dune, down a dune, you're in the Atlantic Ocean. I freaking hate the beach. It's August. There are mosquitoes. There are cactuses on an island. I mean, there's sand, and it's hot, and there's no air conditioning, and the showers aren't heated. It's terrible. Why would anyone do that? And it's become one of my favorite places in the whole world to be. Because I get to see my kids truly joyful. And being able to be there with them during that time is amazing. I love that. The interest isn't necessarily reciprocal. That's okay. Because the activity, the hobby, is secondary to the main goal, which is being together. Spending time together. That's our ultimate aim, is a genuine encounter with one another. A genuine encounter is one in which we are totally present to the other person. Not with something mediating the encounter, Facebook, social media. Or distracting us. We're both there, but we're on our phones. We're watching TV. We're truly able to engage. Now, we've talked about what some of the pitfalls are. We've talked about the goal. Let's spend a few minutes talking about how do we address some of the challenges and pitfalls. The number one question that I get asked by parents is fill in the blank, amount of screen time, too much screen time for my kid? And I give them every single time the answer that psychologists give most of all, which is not always fulfilling, which is, well, it depends. Depends on your kid. Asking how much screen time is too much screen time for my kid is like saying how much cake is too much cake for my kid. I don't know. My kid's gluten intolerant. So any cake is too much cake for my kid. Other kids could probably eat a whole cake. Again, not advisable. But you have to be aware of how do the devices, how does the screen time, how does the activity impact our kids? Knowing our kids individually, knowing what they can manage and what is good for them. But it's important to identify what excessive use of devices look like. If you have a kid or spouse who is excessively into their phones or their screens, if they're on it all the time, this is a problem. There's a new term that's come out in the last couple of years called phubbing. Have you guys heard of this? Phubbing. P-H-U-B-B-I-N-G. It's the act of ignoring people around you by just staring at your phone. So if you're sitting there around me having a conversation and I'm going, basically in my own world, this is phubbing. If there's conflict in personal relationships as a result of phones or devices, if we're not able to go anywhere without our phones, this is an issue. If you've got that person who's always taking their phone to the bathroom, a word about this. These are very sophisticated electronic devices. They do really poorly when submerged in water. The first time you drop your phone in the toilet, that is a signal from God telling you to stop. Not to mention, I never want to read an email that I know has been composed by someone sitting on the toilet. But we think that's okay. We should not. We want to be able to put the devices away. Thought about, and this mentioned diet. So I work for Catholic Charities. And about 8 years ago, I switched from just running the clinic in Fredericksburg to running a whole bunch of stuff all over. So I actually upgraded and I got a smartphone because I needed things like a map and the ability to check my email when I'm here, not in my office in Fredericksburg. And about 2 weeks after having it, my wife said, "Hey, can we talk?" "Sure, what's up?" "I'm concerned about your use of the phone." "What do you mean?" "I'm working." She said, "I know. You're working all the time. Do you need to have your phone on you all the time?" She was 100% right. My phone doesn't need to be in my pocket when I'm at home. We have a little table by the front desk, by the front door. All the phones go there. That's where the charging stations are. So if I'm not at work, phone goes there. If I happen to walk past it, sure, did somebody email me? Great. But it's not on me all the time. I don't need to be connected all of the time. And I'm so grateful that she said that after only 2 weeks, because it was a really good reminder that I've got to set clear boundaries and definitions for how the technology fits into our lives. It's rare that we are intentional in setting those boundaries. We tend to back into them. You normally don't bring a device in going, "Now, what are we going to do with this, and how much time are we going to spend, and what devices are okay, and what aren't?" It's like, "Oh, hey, sweet, okay, we got an upgrade. We got an iPhone 15. Does it do more things? I think so. We got an iPad. Great, okay. Where's the TV going to go?" The TV is the only appliance in our whole house that we design rooms around. Could you imagine, like, if you were designing your room around a washing machine? Here in the middle is the washing machine for prime access, so I can reach it from any spot in the whole laundry room. But we don't. We pick out the main place for maximum viewing for the TV. Everything else just has a spot. The stand mixer doesn't get sort of like prime placement in the floor. We're not designing things around anything other than that as a television. We need to be active in deciding what is good for our family. And if that's the one thing you guys take away tonight, I hope it's that. Have the conversations about what's good for your family, because it will look different from anybody else. There is no one size fits all. I've had some families say, "We don't do any entertainment screens Monday through Friday." Great, sounds good. I've got other families who say, "Well, as long as the kids get all their stuff done, they can have 30 minutes of whatever they want." Fantastic, great, okay. Other families saying, as long as it's a family activity, we can watch as much of whatever streaming service together as we want. Again, sounds good. But you've had a conversation about it. You've decided this is what works for you guys. You've been active in setting that place, not passive. You haven't allowed it to sneak in and suddenly dominate more time in your 24 hours than you initially intended it to. Monitor what your kids are involved with. Please note that I did say monitor. A lot of teenagers, will get very upset by this. Parents will say, "Well, my kids are going to be upset and say I don't trust them." No. It's not a question of not trusting you. Lord help me, at some point my kids will learn to drive. And they'll get behind the wheel. And I'm going to be an absolute mess until I hear that the car is back in the driveway and the keys are on the hook. Why? My kids are going to be great drivers. I don't doubt that at all, but they're not the only ones on the road. It's all the other idiots I'm worried about. There are a lot of idiots online. So it's not a question of I don't trust you. It's everybody else you might be interacting with that I'm concerned about. When our parents used to drop us off at the mall, what would they say? Don't talk to? What are we allowing to happen in our own homes? We've already said that we don't know everybody on our contacts list. The same is going to be true for our kids. So if we're concerned about talking to strangers in public, why would we suddenly condone that if it's under our own roofs? Be aware of who our kids are talking to. Understand who their friends are. Understand what they're talking about. There's a whole list of excellent apps and software that I could give you guys recommendations for. A quick word on the difference between blocking software and accountability software. Blocking software doesn't work. Blocking software is seen by most tech-savvy kids as a challenge, and they get really motivated by that. Please see my previous comments about working for the NSA. Accountability software lets you go wherever you want online, and then it routes you out to whoever your accountability buddy is, typically your parent. That's not a terrible thing. I've seen too many kids have very, very restrictive guidelines around technology at home and high school, and then go to college and fall apart. Why? They didn't learn how to make the right decision because they didn't have a choice to make the wrong one. Now, I'm not saying we encourage our kids to metaphorically play in traffic, but if you have an alcoholic on a desert island, it's really easy to maintain sobriety because there is no booze. You have to be in a position to make the wrong choice so you can grow in virtue by making the right choice. These are the conversations we have to have with our kids. We need to talk about what it is that the devices are for, what it is that we plan on doing with them, and what sort of trouble can we get when we aren't using them prudently, wisely. In conclusion, and then I'll open it up for some Q&A. Make sure that we're actively cultivating family time. We're incredibly busy. I've lived all over the world. Northern Virginia is still the busiest, most hypercharged scheduled place I've ever seen in my life, and I grew up in inner city London. So, make that time with our families, because if we're not spending time together, one, somebody else will spend time with our kids. But two, we're missing an opportunity to connect with the people that God placed in our lives. Our vocation is the living out of God's plan on earth for us uniquely. Our kids are the fruit of that vocation. So when we are pouring into our spouses, when we're pouring into our kids and our families, we are living out in our own way God's salvific mission on earth. And preparing our kids to live out their vocations in turn. I'll leave you all tonight with this. There was a young man that I worked with a number of years ago now, he's 10. And the reason that his parents brought him into my office was he was just anxious and depressed, and one of the things that came out in that was he wanted to spend more time with his family. They were really busy, they had a lot of stuff going on, and he was just sad. He just wanted to spend more time with his family. And I did what at the time was a fairly normal thing. I said, oh, what would you like to do? Like play Mario Kart? And he said, no, I want to play Monopoly. Monopoly? You're 10. I mean, unless you're trained to be a CPA now, no 10-year-old wants to play Monopoly. I didn't say all that out loud. That was in my head. And I said, help me understand that. Another great thing psychologists say. He said, well, Mario Kart's fine, but when we play Mario Kart, we're all staring at the screen. When we're playing Monopoly, we can see each other. There was a recognition that the game was secondary. It was in the middle of the table, but all the important action was going on across the table between all the family members. This young man at the age of 10 understood what I think many of us don't really comprehend until later of life. How important it is to intentionally make those family connections. We must be able to see each other. It's not possible to look someone in the eyes on a webcam. Because if you're looking in the webcam, you're not looking at the screen. If you're looking at their face on the screen, it looks like you're looking at their chin. You can't possibly have an eye-to-eye encounter on a computer. Technology may try to connect us. It may propose to keep us closer, but it can't be our primary form of connection. It can be the steward of our relationships, but not the source. So we must be intentional. Okay, so we've got 23 minutes before the babysitters go on strike. So let's do a quick Q&A. Questions, comments, thoughts, concerns? Man, let's start with you. Absolutely. Just to repeat the question was, given the fact that so many of our kids have to use devices to do their homework,
How do we keep them focusing on their homework without going down the various rabbit holes that are presented to them by being connected online? There are a couple ways we can do that. One is, again, having some pretty intentional conversations about what is a device for, and making sure that we're using our time well. The other thing is having devices in public spaces. We want to make sure that we actually have all of our screens in public spaces where everybody can see stuff. If we are doing things we are supposed to do, we have nothing to worry about. We've got nothing to hide. There are a lot of distractions, and we want to prepare our kids to make those good decisions. Now, there are distractions and have been distractions for hundreds and hundreds of years, but we can develop that maturity, and in particular that executive function, to say, I know you could do X, Y, and Z. Let's get this done first. Land the plane. Do the assignment. We can go ahead and have a fun time on the devices, but let's make sure we've got a clear plan and schedule for when that fits. There's something called the pre-MAC principle in psychology, which is also called the grandmother's principle. It's the one that says, eat all your vegetables and then you can have dessert. It's the idea of do the thing first and then you get something at the end. So saying, look, we're not going to prevent you from playing a game or watching highlights on YouTube or whatever, but let's get this done first and then talk to me. These are conversations that we also want to be having repeatedly. We would not only ever have just one conversation with our kids about human sexuality. A 20-minute conversation go, great, that's my job as a parent, done, best of luck to you with the rest of your life. We would want to go ahead and say, let's really make sure you understand how God made us in this way, and the various ways that it's going to play out at multiple stages of your life. The same, I think, is going to be true with technology. Let's keep having the conversation. Let's keep talking about what does it mean, because to a 5-year-old, it's different than what it looks like to an 11-year-old, to what it looks like for a kid in high school, and certainly by the time they're living independently in college. They need to understand how they actively set that role and place in their life for the device. Does that answer your question? Any other questions? Oh, the babysitter's getting up early. Yes, sir. The question is, how do you help your kids in terms of having a presence on social media? What happens if you give them a little leash, but it gets out of hand? How do you rope them back in? I would not start them on social media. I want to make sure that they have good technology hygiene, technological habits on just devices in general first. Social media is a lot riskier than I think even we are willing to accept, in large part because anything that you do never, ever, ever goes away. My roommate in college recently said, I don't know how anybody born after the year 2000 is ever going to get elected to public office. Because the litter of debris they unintentionally left online. I mean, think about just something trivial. You can't go 2 months on ESPN without a story about some athlete who made a comment on their social media feed at 14 that they're now coming out saying, well, I didn't know and I'm sure then. But this is news. People are being judged by what they do online when they are not yet old enough to vote. I know what I was doing before. I was a big nerd. I was listening to techno music and eating jelly beans. But it's just this idea that we are actually giving kids unfettered access to their permanent records. That's terrifying. So I would actually caution everybody from letting somebody have a social media account before you feel comfortable that your kid can drive safe. Because you're still talking about significant life-impacting decisions that you have to make. One's behind the wheel, one's behind the screen. And that emotional and mental maturity has to be there. And always, always, always make sure that the kids feel comfortable enough to come and talk to us when they have a concern. If kids are worried that they bring something to us and we are going to get mad and shut them down, they won't talk to us. We need to be a safe space for them so they can come and say, hey, I wasn't doing anything wrong, but this person approached me online about X, Y, and Z. And it made me really uncomfortable. please, 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 God, let us have that sort of level of comfort with our kids, that they will bring those concerns to us so we can help them navigate something that a child should never have to navigate on their own. Any other questions? So the question is talking about the addictive nature of technology, what's being done. So one of the major shifts, when McLuhan was writing about the global village, and the idea that the medium is the message, he didn't have advertising tied to that. I mean, like, there's a lot of money to be made online. And sadly, that's what's going to drive decisions more often than not, is how much money can we make on something. There has not been enough research yet in terms of the addictive nature of screens per se, but it's coming. We've already started to see a preliminary diagnosis on video game addiction that was not included in the DSM-5, but it is out there. The World Health Organization has started looking at it, the understanding that if you can have a gambling addiction, you can have an online gambling addiction. If you can have an online gambling addiction, you can be addicted to World of Warcraft, where you see these really tragic stories about people who literally game themselves to death because they haven't eaten for 36 hours or haven't had anything to drink. And there's a lot more going on there, too, in terms of mental health issues. This is not something that the game suddenly caused this person's brain to turn off. But there are a lot of things that we need to be aware of that we have yet to figure out. Research is notoriously slow. Research is probably about 5 years behind real-world issues. But what I think is more telling is when you see interviews with major CEOs of technology companies say things like, "Oh, I would never let my kid have an iPhone." Really? Because your company sells a lot of them. You don't think it's good for your kids to have an iPhone? Interesting. What ought we to read into that? So, without going too much into a rabbit hole here, just a word on addiction, specifically related to pornography. Because I think this is actually going to show where you can have a physiological addiction that is caused by something non-substance related. There have been MRIs done on brains when people are looking at pornography. And there are two different neurotransmitters that get released: norepinephrine and dopamine. Norepinephrine is the arousal neurotransmitter. It's the one that fires our brain up and says, "Hey, get ready, something's going to happen." Dopamine is the reward neurotransmitter, the one that says, "More of that, please, I like that." So both of those things will activate in specific regions of the brain for people looking at pornography. What was interesting is that that specific pattern of neural activity mirrored one other exact pattern of neural activity: the human brain when taking cocaine. So our brains light up looking at pornography the same way that they light up doing cocaine. There's nothing ingested, it's purely visual. So as soon as you cross over to that level of addiction, I don't think we're too far away from saying that it is really possible to have significant physiological, not just psychological, physiological addictions to screens. And that's not even going into all the stuff you can find online. There's a reason why, sadly, the average age of first exposure to pornography in this country is, anybody want to guess?
9?
10.
10.
10. Because you got everything right here. All it takes is somebody going, "Hey, look what I saw." Boop. So we need to be aware that just because we have a magic window to the entire world in our pockets, that doesn't mean it's a good thing. If I had a magic door that could take me anywhere in the world, absolutely, I would learn incredible things.
I can go to any museum I wanted, see any cultural exhibit that I wanted to, experience any culture or heritage I wanted, and I could end up in some really seedy places too. So we need to make sure that our kids are savvy enough to know what's what, and they can't figure that out alone. They need our help with this. We also need to be very, very aware, because we have access to all those same dark alleys too. And one of the things that we can do as parents, model the behavior you want your kids to see. Model the behavior you want your kids to engage with. So if you're saying to your kids, no screens after 9 o'clock, and you're looking at something after 9 o'clock, they're going to go, wait a second. If it was a really big deal, you would do it. If we tell our kids no phones at the table, at dinner, and I've got my phone, oh, but this is work. Father Bob emailed me, it's very important that I get back to this. They're going to look at that and say, no, you're doing the thing you told me not to do. Parenting requires superhuman patience and superhuman virtue. We want to model all of these things for our kids, and we don't have to do it alone. We've got the ability to reach out to friends, our priests, and prayer. It's St. Joseph and the Blessed Mother, two people who we should be asking for their intercession daily. It's a scary world out there, but God put us here to do this and do this. So the question is, what about the sites that have really concerning ideologies, far right, far left, things that don't align with our faith, or hate crimes and things like that? Again, there's a lot of stuff out there. We wouldn't let our kids just roam around the city. I grew up in inner city London. And thank goodness my parents just didn't, give me a tube pass and say, be home by 9. There was a clear sense of where we could and where we couldn't go. But it starts first and foremost with conversations about what does dignity look like? Your dignity, but also the way that we treat other people. So if you encounter something, be it online or, at a cafe, where people are spewing things that don't align with what we understand to be the beauty of God's creation, and the fact that we are all made in God's image and likeness and have that innate dignity, anything that doesn't align with that, we go, wait a second, this doesn't sound good, and I should come talk to my parents about that. Because you're right, there are a lot of things out there that are unmonitored, unfettered, and you can get to some really weird places really, really quickly online if you are not cautious. The problem comes not when we accidentally find something, but when we choose to stay. And say, whatever lie you want to tell yourself, I can handle it, it's not going to affect me. No, just go. There's no point sticking around there if it doesn't align with what we know to be true about our world and about God's plan. All right, I know let's have one last question. It's a great question. The question is, how do we keep engaged when there are so many other things that can distract us or pull us apart, either parent schedules or illness or demands quality over quantity? So, without going into too much, so we've got quite a bit of chronic illness in my family. And I work until 10 o'clock 4 nights a week. So, I would love to say that I've got a solid 40 hours to spend with my wife and kids every week. And I don't. We try to anchor the points that are key. So I may work until 10 o'clock, but I try to be home for dinner and the rosary and then go back to work. I don't do anything on Sunday. Because we decided, no, that's a Sabbath. Boom, that's a family day. We are not going to plan anything if we can avoid it on that day. So it's the intentionality
based on the time that we do have, because there are a ton of other demands between school and jobs and work and cleaning the house and doctor's appointments and other things that we have to do. We need to do those things. Those are good, they're not bad things. But are we making sure that we're making a priority to spend that family time and make that the anchor point and then fit everything else around? Because if we do that, even if we may only have 3, 4, 5 good hours a week that we can do, we know that we are giving from our heart to make that the linchpin of our day, of our week, of our time. Does that answer your question? All right, let me end now. I'm going to stick around for a little while, so if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Also, Annalisa has my email address, so if you guys want to get in touch with me that way, I'm happy to have you guys reach out as well. Please be assured of my prayers for all of you and for your families. I wish you a very blessed Holy Week, blessed New and happy Easter. Thank you all. Thank you.